Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Soft Stories. I know that it has been some time since we've seen each other, and I regret that that's the case. I know that there is a lot going on in the world right now, and so a lot of things have changed for all of us. I moved into a lovely new home just over a year ago, and with that move came a disruption in the normal routines in many parts of my life. And though it was a move for the best, and one which I have not regretted for a single minute, it has meant that I lost momentum on reading to you all, something which I have regretted for a long time. But now I have the opportunity to come back to you all and to pick up where we left off. I have some plans for the future of Soft Stories, plans which I hope to realize very soon. But in the meantime, we have some books that we have left unfinished, a task which always brings me some anxiety. And so, without further ado, let us continue the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I believe that the last chapter that we read together was Book 10, and so, as my copy falls open to the marked page, I see we are indeed about to begin Book 11 of the Meditations. It begins thusly. The properties of the rational soul. It looks on itself, it shapes itself, it makes itself, however it wishes to be. It gathers for itself the fruit it bears, whereas the fruit of plants and the corresponding produce of animals is gathered by others. It achieves its own end wherever the limit of life is set. Unlike a ballet or a play or such like, where any interruption aborts the whole performance, in every scene and whenever it is cut off, the rational soul has its own program, complete and entirely fulfilled, so it can say, I am in possession of my own. Further, the rational soul traverses the whole universe and its surrounding void, explores the shape of it, stretches into the infinity of time, encompasses and comprehends the periodic regeneration of the whole. It reflects that our successors will see nothing new, just as our predecessors saw nothing more than we do. Such is the sameness of things. A man of 40 with any understanding whatsoever has, in a sense, seen all the past and all the future. Particular qualities, too, of the rational soul are love of neighbour, truthfulness, integrity, no higher value than itself. This last is a defining quality of law also. There is thus no difference between the true principle of philosophy and the principle of justice. You will think little of the entertainment of song or dance or all in wrestling if you deconstruct the melodic line of a song into its individual notes and ask yourself, of each of them, is this something that overpowers me? You will recoil from that admission. So too with a comparable analysis of dance by each movement and each pose, and the same again with wrestling. Generally, then, with the exception of virtue and its workings, remember to go straight to the component parts of anything, and go through that analysis, and come to despise the thing itself. And the same method should be applied to the whole of life. What a noble thing is the soul, ready for its release from the body, if now must be the time, and prepared for whatever follows, extinction, dispersal, or survival. But this readiness must come from a specific decision, not in mere revolt like the Christians, but thoughtful, dignified, and, if others are to believe it, undramatic. Have I done something for the common good? Then I too have benefited. Have this thought always ready to hand, and no stopping. What is your profession? Being a good man. But this can only come about through philosophic concepts, concepts of the nature of the whole, and concepts of the specific constitution of man. First, tragedies were brought on stage to remind you of what can happen, that these things are determined by nature, and that what moves you in the theatre should not burden you on the larger stage of life. You can see the way things must turn out, and that even those who cry, "O Cythereon," must bear them. There are some useful sayings, too, in the tragedians. A prime example is, "If I and my 2 sons are now no more the gods' concern, this too will have its cause." Again, mere things, brute facts, should not provoke your rage. And ripe ears of corn are reaped, and so are lies. And many other things like that. After tragedy, the old comedy was introduced. There was educational value in its unbridled frankness, and this plain speaking was of itself a useful warning against pomposity. Diogenes, too, adopted this trait to a similar end. After this, examine the nature of middle comedy and the purpose of the subsequent adoption of new comedy, which gradually slipped into the mere artistry of imitation. True, it is recognized that these writers, too, said some useful things. But what was the whole thrust and aim of this sort of poetry and drama. How clearly it strikes you that there is no other walk of life so conducive to the exercise of philosophy as this in which you now find yourself. A branch cut from its neighbouring branch is necessarily cut away from the whole tree. In the same way, a human being severed from just one other human has dropped from the whole community. Now the branch is cut off by someone else, but a man separates himself from his neighbour by his own hatred or rejection, not realizing that he has thereby severed himself from the wider society of fellow citizens. Only there is this gift we have from Zeus, who brought together the human community. We can grow back again to our neighbour and resume our place in the complement of the whole. Too often repeated, though, such separation makes it harder to unite and restore the divided part. In sum, the branch which stays with the tree from the beginning of its growth and shares its transpiration is not the same as the branch which is cut off and then regrafted, whatever the gardeners say. Share their stock, but not their doctrines. Just as those who try to block your progress along the straight path of reason will not be able to divert you from principled action, so you must not let them knock you out of your good will towards them. Rather, you should watch yourself equally on both fronts, keeping not only a stability of judgment and action, but also a mild response to those who try to stop you or are otherwise disaffected. To be angry with them is no less a weakness than to abandon your course of action and capitulate in panic. Both amount equally to desertion of duty, either being frightened into retreat or setting yourself at odds with your natural kinsmen and friends. No nature is inferior to art. In fact, the arts imitate the variety of natures. If that is so, then the most perfect and comprehensive of all natures could not be surpassed by any artistic invention. Now, all arts create the lower in the interests of the higher. So this is the way of universal nature, too. And indeed, here is the origin of justice, from which all other virtues take their being, since there will be no preservation of justice if we are concerned with indifferent things, or gullible and quick to chop and change. The external things whose pursuit or avoidance troubles you do not force themselves on you, but in a way you yourself go out to them. However that may be, keep your judgment of them calm, and they too will stay still. Then you will not be seen either to pursue or to avoid. The soul is a sphere which retains the integrity of its own form if it does not budge or contract for anything, does not flare or subside, but keeps the constant light by which it sees the truth of all things and the truth in itself. Someone despises me? That is his concern. But I will see to it that I am not found guilty of any word or action deserving contempt. Will he hate me? That is his concern. But I will be kind and well-intentioned to all, and ready to show this very person what he is failing to see, not in any criticism or display of tolerance, but with genuine goodwill, like the famous Phocion, if, that is, he was not speaking ironically. This should be the quality of our inner thoughts, which are open to the God's eyes. They should see a man not disposed to any complaint, and free of self-pity. And what harm can you suffer if you yourself at this present moment are acting in kind with your own nature, and accepting what suits the present purpose of universal nature, a man at full stretch for the achievement, this way or that, of the common good? They despise each other, but still toady to each other. They want to win, but still grovel. The rotten pretense of the man who says, "I prefer to be honest with you." What are you on about, man? No need for this preface. The reality will show. It should be written on your forehead, immediately clear in the tone of your voice and the light of your eyes, just as the loved one can immediately read in all the glance of his lovers. In short, the good and honest man should have the same effect as the unwashed. Anyone close by as he passes detects the aura willy-nilly at once. Calculated honesty is a stiletto. There is nothing more degrading than the friendship of wolves. Avoid that above all. The good, honest, kindly man has it in his eyes, and you cannot mistake him. Live through life in the best way you can. The power to do so is in a man's own soul, if he is indifferent to things indifferent. And he will be indifferent if he looks at these things both as a whole and analyzed into their parts, and remembers that none of them imposes a judgment of itself or forces itself on us. The things themselves are inert. It is we who procreate judgments about them and, as it were, imprint them on our minds. But there is no need for imprinting at all, and any accidental print can immediately be erased. Remember, too, that our attention to these things can only last a little while, and then life will be at an end. And what, anyway, is the difficulty in them? If they are in accord with nature, welcome them, and you will find them easy. If they are contrary to nature, look for what accords with your own nature and go straight for that, even if it brings you no glory. anyone can be forgiven for seeking his proper good. With each object of experience, consider its origin, its constituents, what it is changing into, and what it will be when changed, and that no harm will have come to it. First, how do I regard my relation to them, and the fact that we were all born for each other, and turning the argument that I was born to be their leader, as the ram leads his flock and the bull his herd. But start from first principles. If not atoms, then nature governing all. If so, then the lower in the interests of the higher, and the higher for each other. Second, what sort of people are they, at table, in bed, and so on? Most of all, what sort of behaviour their opinions impose on them, and their complacent pride in acting as they do. Third, if what they do is right, no cause for complaint. If wrong, this is clearly out of ignorance, and not their wish. Just as no soul likes to be robbed of truth, so no soul wants to abandon the proper treatment of each individual as his worth deserves. At any rate, these people resent the imputation of injustice, cruelty, selfishness, in a word, crimes against their neighbours. Fourth, you yourself have many faults and are no different from them. If you do refrain from some wrongs, you still have the proclivity to them, even if your restraint from wrongs like theirs is due to the fear or pursuit of public opinion, or some other such poor motive. Fifth, you are not even sure that they are doing wrong. Many things are done as part of a larger plan, and generally one needs to know a great deal before one can pronounce with certainty on another's actions. Sixth, when you are high in indignation and perhaps losing patience, remember that human life is a mere fragment of time, and shortly we are all in our graves. Seventh, it is not their actions which trouble us, because these lie in their own directing minds, but our judgments of them. Well, remove these judgments, and make up your mind to dismiss your assessment of some supposed outrage, and your anger is gone. And how to remove them? By reflecting that no moral harm is caused you. If moral harm were not the only harm, it would necessarily follow that you yourself are guilty of causing much harm, and become a robber, a rogue. Eighth, the greater grief comes from the consequent anger and pain, rather than the original causes of our anger and pain. 9th, kindness is invincible if it is sincere, not fawning or pretense. What can the most aggressive man do to you if you continue to be kind to him? If, as opportunity arises, you gently admonish him and take your time to re-educate him at the very moment when he is trying to do you harm? No, son, we were born for other purposes than this. There is no way that I can be harmed, but you are harming yourself, son. And show him delicately how things are, making the general point that bees do not act like this, or any other creatures of gregarious nature. But your advice must not be ironic or critical. It should be affectionate, with no hurt feelings, not a lecture or a demonstration to impress others, but the way you would talk to someone by himself, irrespective of company. Keep these 9 points in your mind, take them as gifts from the Muses, and begin at long last to be a human being, while life remains. You should avoid flattery as much as anger in your dealings with them. Both are against the common good and lead to harm. In your fits of anger, have this thought ready to mind, that there is nothing manly in being angry, but a gentle calm is both more human and therefore more virile. It is the gentle who have strength, sinew, and courage, not the indignant or complaining. The closer to control of emotion, the closer to power. Anger is as much a sign of weakness as is pain. Both have been wounded and have surrendered. Now, if you will, take a 10th gift from the leader of the Muses. The thought that it is madness to expect bad men to do no wrong. That is asking for the impossible. But it is cruel tyranny to allow them such behavior to others, while demanding that they do no wrong to you. There are 4 particular corruptions of the directing mind, for which you must keep constant watch, and eliminate them whenever you detect them, in each case applying one of these formulas. This mental image is superfluous. This could weaken the bond of community. This would not be yourself speaking. To say what you do not feel should be regarded as the height of contradiction. And the 4th case for self-reproach is that in which the more divine part of you loses the contest and bows to the lower, mortal part, the body and its gross pleasures. All the elements of air and fire that are mingled in you have a natural tendency to rise, but nevertheless obey the dispensation of the whole, and are kept waiting here in the compound of the body. And all the elements of earth and water in you, whose tendency is to sink down, are nevertheless raised up and stay in a position unnatural to them. So even the elements are obedient to the whole. Assigned their place, they are forced to stay there, until the signal authorizing their dissolution once more is given from that same source. So, is it not strange that it is only your intelligent part which rebels and complains of the place given, and yet there is nothing forced on it, only what accords with its own nature, but still it refuses to comply, and sets off in the opposite direction. Any movement towards acts of injustice or self-indulgence, to anger, pain, or fear, is nothing less than an apostasy from nature. Further, whenever the directing mind feels resentment at any happening, that too is a desertion of its proper post. It was constituted not only for justice to men, but no less for the reverence and service of God. This also a form of fellowship, perhaps yet more important than the operation of justice. The man without one and the same aim in his life cannot himself stay one and the same throughout his life. The maxim is incomplete unless you add what sort of aim that should be. Judgments vary of the whole range of various things taken by the majority to be goods in one way or another. But only one category commands a universal judgment, and that is the good of the community. It follows that the aim we should set ourselves is a social aim, the benefit of our fellow citizens. A man directing all his own impulses to this end will be consistent in all his actions, and therefore the same man throughout. The hill mouse and the house mouse, and the frightened scurrying of the house mouse. Socrates used to call the popular beliefs bogies, things to frighten children with. At their festivals, the Spartans would put seats for visitors in the shade and sit themselves wherever they could. Socrates to Perdiccas of Macedon, declining the invitation to visit him, to avoid dying the worst of deaths, that is, the inability to return in kind benefits received. In Epicurean writings, there is laid down the precept that one should continually keep in mind one of those who followed the path of virtue in earlier times. The Pythagoreans say, "Look at the sky at dawn, to remind ourselves of the constancy of those heavenly bodies, their perpetual round of their own duty, their order, their purity, and their nakedness. No star wears a veil." Think of Socrates in his underclothes when Xanthippe had gone out with his coat, and what he said to his friends retiring in embarrassment when they saw the state of his dress. In writing and reading, you must learn before you can teach, yet more so in life. You were born a slave. You have no voice. And the heart within me laughed. They will pour scorn on virtue and sting with their abuse. Only a madman looks for figs in winter, just as mad to hope for a child when the time of this gift is past. Epictetus used to say that when you kiss your child, you should say to yourself, "Tomorrow you may be dead." But these are ominous words. No, he replies, nothing is ominous which points to a natural process. Otherwise, it would be ominous to speak of the corn being reaped. Grapes, unripe, ripened, raisined, all changes, not into non-existence, but into not yet existence. No thief can steal your will, so Epictetus. Another saying of his, we must discover an art of assent, and in the whole field of our impulses take care to ensure that each impulse is conditional, has a social purpose, and is proportionate to the value of its goal. We must keep absolutely clear of personal motivation, and, at the same time, show no disinclination to anything outside our immediate control. Again, so this is not a contest for a trivial prize. At issue is madness or sanity. Socrates used to question thus, what do you want to have? The souls of rational or irrational beings? Rational. What sort of rational beings? The pure or the lower? The pure. Why then don't you aim for that? Because we have it. Why then your fighting and disagreements? So ends Book 11 of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. That was an interesting one, and it seems strange today as we think of this work as a great piece of Stoic philosophical writing, to be so reminded that it was a journal for the thoughts of Marcus Aurelius, his own diary, in a sense, in which he wrote scraps of his personal thoughts and remembrances on how to be a good emperor. I think we see that in the latter half of this chapter, where the passages are very short, often 1 or 2 lines, just things that he wanted to remember and to be able to call on when he needed a little pick-me-up. So I'm sorry if that last part felt a bit disjointed. It did reading it, and I worry that it will feel even more so when spoken aloud and listened to. And so I highly recommend, if the philosophy that we've talked about in both this book and in the Epictetus's Handbook series of videos that we did some time ago now, I would recommend picking up a copy of the Meditations, because of the way that it is written in small passages. It's very easily digestible and very easy to pick up and put down, or open to a random page and continue from there. I think that's the way that people who own a copy and are not studying it but just enjoying it for the prose that it is, I think that's the way that, well, at least I have used it in the past. And I am so happy that I'm getting to share it with you now. We are nearly at the end of the Meditations, just one book left. And so I hope you'll join me next time on Soft Stories for the conclusion of our reading of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I look forward to seeing you then. And until next we meet, I wish you all the best. Goodbye.